Do my eyes deceive me, friends? Is that an emulator on the iPhone? Oh, I was going to talk about it. Emulators are something that I'm passionate about on this channel because I believe preserving games is important, okay? I play a lot of old stuff, I play a lot of new stuff, and something I agree with is 20 years down the road, if I want to play some Earthbound and Nintendo isn't selling me a copy, then I'm a play the ROM that I have legally backed up onto my system. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe it's a human right to emulate, okay? But that said, I ain't gonna get into it that hard. Now, for those of you who are on the mobile front, you have two paths to go down, okay? You've got the iPhone and you've got the Android. Now, I personally prefer the third hidden path, which is still bring out the old Nokia with the snake game. But most people don't take that path anymore. Now, personally, I think the whole argument about Android versus iPhone is lame as fuck, okay? Personally, because I really don't think it matters what device you kind of use. At the end of the day, these devices are made to make calls, send text messages, browse the internet, use social media. And for some people, gaming is a pretty important thing. When I was younger, trying to game on the iPod Touch or my first Android phone, which, well, that wasn't too long ago, I want to say my first smartphone was like, a decade ago? Trying to play games on those devices, you really didn't have a whole lot of options. Most of the games kids these days can play are games that you would find on consoles back in the day. Full Call of Duty releases, Warzone exists in its entirety, and to be honest, if you have the newest iPhones, you can play games like Resident Evil 4 Remake. It's mind-boggling to think that there are PS5 level games available right now on mobile devices. Now, back when I was younger, trying to emulate games wasn't a matter of if the product allowed it. It was literally up to, did my actual device have the strength to emulate certain things? So, emulators like PS2, you couldn't even dream of. But nowadays, if you have an Android device, you can download Aether SX2 and play actual PlayStation 2 games at full speed on an Android device. It's insane. Now, of course, when it comes to Apple, ladies and gentlemen, they just have an actual game emulator on the App Store. Now, this is mind-boggling because, ladies and gentlemen, I am not joking with you. There is an actual emulator available for iPhone on the App Store. No hacking, no sideloading, no jailbreaking. Apple has finally allowed emulators. Now, I thought when I read about this shit a week ago, I thought, it's probably some technicality to allow Nintendo to sell some games. But now, you can play Pokemon Emerald on your iPhone without actually jailbreaking it. Pretty massive thing to see. So again, I actually downloaded this emulator, and surprise, surprise, it is something that I was using on the iPhone for years at this point. Except it was through a pretty unofficial store called the Alt Store, which if you live in the European Union, because of the laws over there, they actually have to allow you to install this as a third-party store. Now, it's not perfect. For instance, you actually have to go to their store and download it and basically pay $1.50 or €1.50 a year, 1.5, and you can install this. Now, that's not a terribly expensive price tag to get access to another store. But I also think it's really stupid that you can buy a piece of hardware and you have to pay to install the store. Then that doesn't make any sense. This is why Apple devices are literally the Fisher Price of smartphones. The fact that y'all gotta fucking pay to install third-party app stores when Android, you be installing APKs for free because it's your device, it's your product, is mind-boggling, okay? Freedom over being locked down like this, like a dog. But again, ladies and gentlemen, this is an actual emulator you can install right now and play games. And it plays all the way from old school NES stuff, SNES, N64, Nintendo DS, Game Boy Advance, and Game Boy Color. Now, to understand, it's even got multiplayer support, so if you're into that shit, you can play some multiplayer. And this is just the beginning, okay? To give you an idea, Apple had a recent update where you could literally install retro game app emulators. So again, the definition of retro, I don't know what it means necessarily for Apple. Retro could be all the way up to PlayStation 3, but I doubt we're going to get RPCS 3 on the iPhone anytime soon, okay? The day I can play Metal Gear Solid 4 on an iPhone, is going to be a wild day, but I don't think we're close to that yet. But PS2, GameCube, the original Xbox can technically be retro, so I'm wondering if at some point down the road, maybe that might show up. Obviously, emulators like the Nintendo Switch emulator probably won't show up, because I doubt Nintendo is even excited about looking at this stuff, but I also doubt Nintendo can do much to stop Apple from letting this occur. And I don't think that Apple would have let this brazenly, upload onto the App Store if they didn't expect that there would be some backlash, some problem with Nintendo. But of course, Apple is far larger, and I doubt they care at all, if anything. Ultimately, it is interesting to see this finally happen, and to me, this isn't that big of a deal. The only people that are making this a big deal are, iPhone users, when this kind of stuff has been on Android for, 10 years. Fuck, this has been on every other mobile operating system for a decade plus. This is just new to iPhone because of, rule changes. And ultimately, it's great to see that Apple finally open up, but it's nothing mind-boggling to me, okay? To be honest with you, a lot of mobile gaming for me has died ever since I bought the Steam Deck, because honestly, why would I even bother playing a video game on my mobile device when I can just pick up my Steam Deck and play something like Fallout New Vegas or, Skyrim or Grand Theft Auto 5 or Death Stranding or anything with actual tactile controls and far better visual fidelity than what my phone could ever provide. But I think for somebody that wants to play a round of Pokemon or something, or just an entire game, or Chrono Trigger or anything on their device, on their iPhone, it's good to see them finally be able to fuck around without actually jailbreaking their device, okay? Now again, something like this used to occur, even before all of this, through shit like the Side Store, for instance, where, again, this was the only way to install third-party applications on your iPhone device. So if you wanted to install IPA files, which is the APK equivalent for iOS, you would have to go through a hurdle, developer accounts, sideloading, just to get access to any of that nonsense, which again, if you were a power user or you wanted more freedom on your device, it's kind of insane how you have to go through all of these hoops just to install a third-party tool on your device. Especially when under the same umbrella, if you have a Mac, you can install third-party programs from the internet. If Apple ever changed that, I personally believe that would be the death of macOS right there and then. And I hope to God Apple doesn't decide to go down that route. But if they do, funny video right there. Now again, one of the problems with something like this, while it is interesting to see, is Apple hasn't completely allowed every single aspect of what an emulator would want. For instance, something known as JIT, which if you really need that in certain applications, that is just-in-time compilation, which if you don't know what that necessarily is, a quick explanation is, it's compilation during execution of a program rather than before execution. This may consist of source code translation, but is more commonly bytecode to machine code, which is then executed directly. A system implementing a JIT compiler typically continuously analyzes the code being executed and identifies parts of the code where the speed-up gain from compilation or recompilation would outweigh the overhead of compiling that code. In simple terms, the idea is the more complex your emulators become, so when you start dealing with, up their emulators, things like ZMU, the PlayStation 2 stuff, maybe Nintendo Switch, RPCS3, I think Wii, GameCube stuff is also in that similar vein. You want to have as many optimizations as you can. The problem with Apple software is Apple runs on something known as the hardened runtime, and this is just for the macOS system, but I believe it also exists for iPhone. Please correct me if I'm wrong, any developer out there. And the general idea is the hardened runtime doesn't affect the operation of most apps, but it does disallow certain less common capabilities, like just-in-time compilation. If your app relies on a capability that the hardened runtime restricts, add an entitlement to disable an individual protection. Now, from my understanding, you can kind of remove this under macOS, but when it comes to Apple's iOS, things are a lot different. And Apple doesn't really want people fucking around and causing things like battery drain or severe performance issues that make the device potentially look bad or unoptimized, right? They'd rather throw app developers under the bus to make, again, the general system run more efficiently overall, which again, depending on how you perceive this, people have a split feeling about this. And of course, for emulators, that is something you absolutely need. And one of the things that I've seen and read about this is with all these third-party tools and App Store releases, that JIT necessarily isn't available. So again, it's fine if you're playing games that are Game Boy Advance titles or Super Nintendo titles or even PlayStation 1 stuff. It's when you start getting into more recent, emulators where it becomes a serious issue. Now, that being said, Apple is just doing Apple things, and I'm glad to see them open up. But to give you an idea of where we're at with mobile gaming and emulation, ladies and gentlemen, this is Winlator, okay? This is allowing you to run Windows applications on Android via Wine and Box86. So to give you an idea, Android, for the most part, is ultimately a Linux device. And while Android devices run on ARM-based systems, ARM-based processors, the tool Wine is something that you've probably heard of if you're a Linux gamer. Hell, if you have the Steam Deck, you use Wine to play Windows games underneath a Linux system. So to give you an idea of where Winlator is right now, there are actually people playing Grand Theft Auto 5, the PC version, underneath an Android device right now. Now, the performance here isn't crazy massive. It's not like you're getting 120 frames on maximum settings. This is a 10-year-old game running at around 30 frames per second, although on a mobile device. Now, that should blow you away. This is, again, an emulation of a PC game underneath an Android platform. You can only imagine how good this would run had it officially been ported by Rockstar to the Android or iOS platforms. But we're getting to a point where PC gaming is starting to become a thing on actual Android devices. So that's the level of, I guess you could say, gap that exists in emulation. Apple users finally got Game Boy Advance running. Android people are getting GTA 5 running on their system. So there is a big gap, and a lot of that has to do with, again, operating systems and the fundamental freedoms that they provide. But yeah, Apple decided to do the impossible, which is open up their store and actually get retro gaming emulators underneath them. And ultimately, it's a net boon, right? Like, when it comes to mobile gaming, I don't think you're ever going to find anything better than playing some classic Game Boy Advance, Super Nintendo titles on your actual device. And I think ultimately, at the end of the day, for most people, right, like that's about enough. That's about the most that they can expect. Play some Ocarina of Time, play some N64 slop, do whatever they needed to. And because this is allowed, I'm actually wondering if RetroArch or DuckStation or a lot of these other big popular emulators are going to start showing up over the course of this weekend or maybe next week. Who knows? This is actually uncharted territory, and it's interesting to see that for the first time, Apple has decided to take the stick out of their asshole and actually provide another, reason to at least buy an Apple product. So cool stuff, interesting to see. And personally, I wanted to wait a few days before I made a video because in my mind, I still think this could be revoked. Okay, Apple's weird like that. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, wild shit. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike or dislike it. I am out.